YouTube, what it do, YouTube, Down Home News TV. I am Dre. We got a video coming from Tucker Carlson. The title of the video is The One Thing Tucker Carlson and Malcolm X Agree On. Pretty interesting because I would like to see what he agrees with Malcolm about. So yeah, let me stop procrastinating. Let's get into it.
I don't know too much about it, but I'm really struck by the difference. Like, I grew up thinking, Martin Luther King was like a great man. I still think great things about him. And Malcolm X was a really sort of evil figure. But if you listen to Malcolm X, he's a lot closer, with some big differences, but in general to what you're describing as positive.
Correct.
And he got murdered.
And so did King. I have enormous respect for the straight-backed, manly, autonomous,
Yes.
independent, responsibility-embracing
Amen.
posture of Malcolm X. He says, nobody is coming to save us. We had better take care of our own. Are you raising your children? Did you pick up the trash in front of your house?
Exactly.
Will you start a business? You don't have wealth. You're waiting with your hand out for somebody to give you wealth. Why don't you start a business? Why don't you take care of your own community? Get busy.
So why? Okay. So like all high school students, I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, which I don't even know if it was written by Malcolm X. Was written by Alex Haley, but I don't know to what extent it reflected his real views. But then with YouTube, I watched a couple of Malcolm X speeches, and it was like a totally different person from the one I was presented in high school, and much more along the lines of what you just said. And I was like, well, why isn't this guy much more famous than he is now? One of the speeches, he goes off after white liberals, and he's like, whites are bad, whites are a problem, but the real problem is white liberals. And I was like, you go, Malcolm X. Why isn't he? It almost feels like his message has been suppressed a little bit, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not a historian, but I see what you say, and I do think there are aspects of his message that are extremely threatening to established order. And he was a Muslim. He was succeeded in his leadership of that movement ultimately by Louis Farrakhan, who was a notorious anti-Semite, quote unquote. Yes. So there's that. But Malcolm X was uncompromising about, remember his comment after the Kennedy assassination, chickens come home to roost and whatnot.
What do you think he meant by that? I've never understood what that meant.
I think he meant U.S. entailment in global affairs has created enemies. The U.S. has undertaken various operations that are, in effect, responsible for the blowback that we're seeing. That's what I think he meant.
Yeah. Probably some truth in that.
Well, you're the conspiracy theorist.
No, hardly. I'm just trying to understand the world.
Are we ever going to see all the documents related to that?
Not. Of course not. And, to the three, so the president issued an executive order on January 23rd, one of the first things that he did after the inauguration, commanding with the force of law, the federal agencies, the executive branch, to declassify all documents pertaining to the assassinations of John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and Bobby Kennedy in 1968. And that hasn't happened. But you have to ask yourself, well, why 60 years later are they still classified in the first place? Like, what is that? And I don't think it's because the truth is easy to deal with. I mean, I still think the truth 60 years later is really threatening to somebody, clearly. Because on some level, like, why would you care? If you found out there was a, complex conspiracy to assassinate Garfield, you'd be like, okay, it's long over. Like, I think we can tell the truth. Everyone's dead. Exactly. So it does make you wonder, like, well, what is this actually? And I know for a fact, a verifiable fact, that the pushback against declassifying the stuff within the government has been very intense, very intense. So that tells you that there's something worth hiding. I certainly hope, because I believe in disclosure and honesty, that it all comes out. But you do get the feeling, not as a conspiracy nut, but as an honest person trying to make sense of history in the present, that a lot of our assumptions are based on things that aren't true or fully true. Do you sense that? People are the one thing that actually matter in this world. Every life is holy and sacred and beautiful. That's a fact, but it's also true that unplanned pregnancies rattle people. They can be shocking and make people very emotional. What's going to happen in my future? There's joy often, but there can also be confusion and doubt and denial. One thing that does not help is when people whisper in a pregnant woman's ear and say, oh, it's not a baby, it's just a random clump of cells. Just get an abortion. Shout your abortion. Scream about it. Tell the world that getting an abortion makes you happy. It's all a lie. It makes you sad. It's horrible. The only thing that makes you happy is other people. That's a fact. And our friends at Preborn know that. They know what's at stake, and in the most compassionate way, they are helping women make the right choice. So rather than pushing the death narrative, their mission is to empower women with the choice of life, and it's working. Last year alone, Preborn rescued over 67,000 babies through ultrasound. When people have the knowledge, they decide they want a child. You can help them do this. One ultrasound costs $28. That's it, $28. Just visit preborn.com/Tucker to help today, or dial pound 250 and say the keyword baby. That's pound 250 baby. Life is what matters.
I do, and it's deeply disquieting to me, actually.
Yeah.
Because it means that the reality that I take for granted is orchestrated or manufactured, and there are forces, I would have to presume dark forces at work that I don't fully understand.
Yes.
And then if this is not what it appears to be, what else that I take for granted is a charade or a fantasy?
I mean, in some ways, obviously you've been an African-American conservative for a long time, moved around, but basically you've been against the conventional view of things for a long time, I would say.
Yeah.
But you're also working within like the very heart of the system. Harvard, Brown, MIT, like you have every possible credential. So at what point did it occur to you that maybe some of this was fake? When did you start to think that?
I don't really know the answer to that question. I'm going to make a personal reference. I married my wife, LaJuan, whom you've met.
I had like the best
just about 8
dinner
years
with
ago.
Her last night, yes. She's awesome.
And I would say that relationship has been a wake-up call for me, in that she brings a perspective that's very different from my conventional. I read the New York Times, and I pretty much believe what I'm reading. I read the Washington Post. I read the Wall Street Journal. I read the Chronicles of Higher Education. That's what they're saying. And, I take it seriously, and I watch television. I watch the Sunday shows and whatnot. And she's like, man, that is all manufactured consent. She's going to pull out Noam Chomsky on me. So I say all that to say, while I am not necessarily going to parrot her perspective on things, encountering her perspective has caused me to revisit some of my own assumptions.
And it's been uncomfortable, you said.
Yeah, I think so. Sure.
Why?
Because it turns out that, and this actually relates to the book that I have coming out from Polity Books called Self-Censorship in a couple of months. It makes me aware of the fact that the discussion of controversial and sensitive matters that is sanitized and acceptable in the mainstream venues is only the tip of the iceberg of legitimate discussion and debate, and that if you don't do your quote unquote your own research, if you don't exert an effort, if you don't look around, if you don't listen to alternative voices, if you don't access independent media, which we are awash in now, but which is relatively new, last quarter century or so, you're being led around by the nose. You're being how did Malcolm X say? You're being bamboozled. You're being hoodwinked. You're not exercising your full critical capacities. You have to exert the effort to look beyond what's right in front of your nose.
And we're gonna take off on that one, but yeah, I kind of wonder the same thing when it comes to how come Malcolm X isn't celebrated as much as MLK. I know he was a little more controversial just because of his background. MLK seemed like the more clean cut. Well, they both were clean cut, but more sanitized for public consumption, I guess you could say. But this is just my opinion when it comes to Malcolm X. And one of the final nails in the coffin for his life, I believe, or I believe, when I was watching the movie and he went to Mecca and he realized all the various nationalities, ethnicities over there worshiping Allah. And he had, I guess, kind of like a come to God moment when he realized we're all in this together and we shouldn't be fighting amongst each other just based on the color of our skin and what little differences that we have, because at the end of the day, we're all humans. We have a lot more in common than we do not in common. But that's my 2 cents. I know it's not worth much, but take it for what it's worth. Down Home News TV, I'm Dre. Hopefully to be more consistent with these videos. Just depends on how life treats me.